Hello, Shadowrek here, and today I'm here with the advanced version of my Warcraft Logs guides for Mythic Plus log diving. I do have the basic video that I put out, and that is for if you don't really know how to look into Warcraft Logs. It'll be linked in the description below, as well as pinned in the comments, and that video goes over a basic guideline of how you're going to go through Warcraft Logs and utilize the tool, where this video is going to be more advanced on how to actually look into your Mythic Plus logs and learn from them. So if you haven't watched the basic video and you don't really have a good idea of what you're doing on Warcraft Logs, I'd recommend starting there and then coming back to this video after. Well, without further ado, let's get started here. So, here is just a page of one of my logged keys. This is a plus 19 rookery. And there's going to be, a lot of things that we can look into. The things that I want to cover in this are going to be, like specifics of damage done, viewing in your buff windows for damage that you dealt, and just trying to figure out where your damage may be off. Comparing to different logs so that you can compare yourself to top logs in a similar key run, and that can more directly show you where your damage is missing compared to somebody else that may be able to do more in that key and what you need to work on. And then you can look for other problems, such as like Furious Gaze not being applied if your eye beams are being cancelled, so kind of going through buffs and how to see things like that, as well as many other things. So, to start, I'm going to come in and look at damage dealt. Now, this is just damage done, clicking into yourself, and you can see a big drop down of how all your damage is done throughout the key. One thing I will note is damage done in logs is different from details. So your overall damage that's shown here, this 4.6 million DPS, that is over the entire duration of the key. And then there's this active percent that you can hover. And this shows your DPS while you're active, which is basically when you're in combat. This will not include time when you're dead. So there could be some discrepancy from details first, but details is a lot closer to this DPS while active number than it is to the DPS number that shows over here, as details doesn't take your DPS down outside of combat. Now, going into my damage, and the first thing that you're going to notice, this is consistent every key. Immolation Aura should be your number one. Now, this isn't just Immolation Aura, and this is, again, different from details, but this is all of your Immolation Aura IDs merged together, and your Ragefire damage. Next is going to be very close, but it's your Throw Glaive and Soul Scar damage mixed together, and then Eye Beam, and then Wounded Quarry or Fury of the Eldrazi should be very similar, and those should be your next highest. However, when I check other logs, typically most Demon Hunters do not have these as their 4th and 5th. So that's going to be a place to work at for most players. Then it will continue down Annihilation, Death Sweep, and your Demon Reaper's Glaive, Sigil Spite. This is going to move a little bit as they're so close to each other. And this can also vary a little bit based on the dungeon that you are in. You'll have more Wounded Quarry and Fury of the Eldrazi damage in Cinderbrew than you will in Rookery, for example. So, there's a lot that you can look into, and it depends what exactly you want to look at. Maybe it's like, hey, I want to know who did the best priority damage in my key to... Let's look at the big Stormrooks. So that will not be the Unruly Stormrook, it'll be the Void Rider. And I can actually pull up both, and, you can always right-click, open a new tab if you don't want to get yourself lost. But we can go in and look at the damage here. The Void Riders, these are the big Void Rider mobs that do the group AoE, and in this key we pulled 2 of them, and you can also see them separated. So if you want to drag in and look at different timing to see who is doing the most damage, you can see that I was funneling into them the entire time, and when you hover and check, you can see the damage dealt specifically to them. And another way that you can look at this is actually through the drop-down list. If you go down and you find the Void Rider, you can hover over it, and because there was 2 different ones pulled, you can see the damage dealt to number 1 and the damage dealt to number 2. And this goes for basically any mob. However, it will also happen in cases where mobs might be like meld reset or anything like that. but I can go look at the damage that was dealt specifically in Group 3 of the Void Diffusers, which actually is not working in here. Give me 1 second. Okay, it's not liking the group usage, but I can see Void Diffuser 4 and Void Diffuser 5, and these are the two that we killed in Bloodlust. So again, that's just something that you can look at if that's where you're trying to see where damage went, or if you just want to look at a specific boss, you can always click bosses and trash up at the top, and pull by pull, everything in the dungeon is separated out. So we can look at the first pull, we can look at our second pull, and you can go specifically to a boss. We pulled trash onto this boss, so if you just want to see boss damage, you can click onto enemies and click onto Curio specifically, or there's also a bosses only button. And we can also go look at something like Scarred Monstrosity. Now, you might want to know damage that was dealt to the shield versus damage that wasn't dealt to the shield, and that is something that you can get by actually typing into this box, absorb damage greater than 0. This will only show damage that was dealt to the shields, so I can see the shielded damage, and the other thing is, so you can back out and see the damage that is not to the shields, but you can always go and zoom in on each burn window as well, and take a look specifically in the windows where the boss was debuffed. Best way to do that is going to be going to Voidstone Monstrosity, going to debuffs, and you're going to want to scroll down until you find the correct debuff. It may actually be applied as a buff to the target. Double check here, and it is. So under the buffs here, you can see Storm's Vengeance, and you can hover to see exactly what each buff is. These aren't always correct because they pull from Wowhead. They can be incorrect, but in this case, it's right, so we're good. And this is just, it takes double damage for 20 seconds. There is a 5-second window before the burn windows, so you can, look at this window here, and then just go damage done by friendlies. And you can see the first burn window this way. And then I can go back, and I can go to 5 seconds before here. I can look at the damage done, click back to friendlies again, damage done in the second burn window, and damage done in the third burn window. We did end up doing 4 in this key. So yeah, you can see I was topping pretty heavily in each one of these windows. And then we just had a 4th burn window to kill the last 3% of the boss off, which was nothing too special. So that's how you look at the damage done, and I'll get into comparing in a moment here, but I do want to go through some other things. You can also check damage taken, and this could be for anything that you want to look at. So let's say we want to look at damage taken on the last boss, and we want to look at damage taken from a specific ability. You can go to taken from ability. There's also taken from source, so it's per target. There's taken per person, and you can hover it and it'll show you what each damage event is. But you can go to taken from ability. Now, null upheaval, this is the smash on the group. And unstable corruption, these are the dots that go out. You can also check to see how many dots somebody got if you're just trying to figure out exactly what went wrong on a boss and someone ran out of defensives. It could be as simple as the dispels kept going out and it kept picking them. You could see here, I got really lucky on this boss, only got 4 of them, whereas Pogs and Bud got 8 each. So it's going to be a lot harder for them on this boss to deal with. And you could do the same thing looking at different bosses. This isn't the best dungeon for it, but you could look at Stormguard Gorin, and you can see kind of who's defensiving or DRing on this Crush Reality. And if you want to look at their damage events per specific one, you can click in, and you can click to events, and you can see each single one broken down with the damage reduction that they had on it. You can see I didn't defensive once in this fight. Honestly, it was just really weird playing with the Death Knight. I'm used to defensiving for the dot, and I didn't really have to take any dots. And lastly, we have the healing page. Not too much to look into here. not for us at least, but you can go and see healing done to targets, and you can, for example, click into your healer and click done to friendly, and see how much that they have to heal out on each specific boss. So you can see, for example, that Havoc takes much less healing than the average person in a group. They need an incredibly low amount of healing, and you can even go and look it over the entire dungeon, how much the healer actually healed enemy versus other people. Let's see, what else can I show you? Let's go to buffs. Now buffs, basically everything is in here. However, sometimes they could be in some weird spots. So depending what you're looking for, and also just being aware of exactly what everything is. For example, Thrill the Fight. That's our 15% attack speed and our 15% damage amp, but they're two different buffs named the same thing. This top one, with higher uptime, is always the attack speed one. And this bottom one is the 10-second damage amp window. So you can go look at those windows and see, if you want to look at that for whatever reason, you can see that there. With Furious Gaze, you can check that to your counts, to your count of I-beams, and you can see I have 64 I-beams in the key, and I have 65 buffs of Furious Gaze. That's because I'm starting the key with one from a pre-pull I-beam. So I don't have any cancellations, which you can tell just from that really simply. Something that is more useful to look at is your Art of the Glaive stacks. Now this is the amount of souls that you're carrying on you. I find that I tend to stock up a lot more in a dungeon like Cinderbrew or Motherlode than I do in Rookery. Except for the end area where you tend to do civilians, then you can see that I got up to even 16 stacks at once. And you can check and see things like whether or not you ever just had your stacks expire. So it takes 30 seconds for those to expire. And you can just kind of have a good judge of everything over the key. So you can see right here that I actually had one drop in this key. We did a skip that I wasn't really familiar to doing, and then ended up losing 7 souls, which is not ideal. Now, there's a lot of things that you could look into here for, even if it's just like, hey, I want to know RNG, how much did my enchants proc for whatever reason, or if you want to come see how much you were getting external from a healer, or if you were getting buffed by PI, that will all also be in here, and they're all sectioned off. There's healing buffs, wound buffs, raid buffs, and if you can't find something, it might be at the bottom in categorized buffs. This is where a tier set is. I'm actually not sure exactly what this Reaver's Glaive one is, but that one shows up down here as well. Oh, you know what? This might be when you have a Reaver's Glaive. No, that doesn't line up either. Okay. Next, let's take a look at timelines. So, this is where it's going to be really important. This is where you can go and look at your opener. Openers, or just any of your meta windows at all, really you could just go try and figure out exactly what was going wrong with your rotation at a given point. And it'll scroll through this list, and you'll want to be on casts not damage done. My apologies. And when you have it on cast, it will show you every single cast that you did. You can use this bar at the bottom here to drag it, or you can scroll it with your mouse. And you can go and see my opener here. I do the typical opener, Sigil of Flame on a mob as I'm going in, Hunt, Reaver's Glaive, and then using my house of cards as I do my Annihilation Death Sweep, spam my Immolation Orbs before I IB. So you can always come in and check and see if you had any wrong rotations, or just other things like if you need to figure out why you missed having a Death Sweep in a given I-beam window. You can look through here, though it is typically better to look at VODs. Logs can be useful for this, and timelines can be really good. So, for the things that are really important to look at, honestly, the number one is going to be your soul generators. So let's take a look into that. This was a 25-minute key, 2547. Obviously, there's some downtime, that flight from the first area, the drop down in the last area, and we had a couple skips. So everything's not going to be perfect, but, you know, with like a 1-minute cooldown for Sigil of Spite, for example, I have 22 casts. The max that could possibly be cast in this dungeon would be 26. Not looking to get 26 because it's not really feasible, but anywhere in somewhere of the like 21 to 24 range would be pretty good. Whereas if you're seeing anything where it's like, and you can actually check the cast itself, if you're seeing anything where you're seeing like more than a 2-minute gap at any point, that is going to be an overhold. And you can see that I had that in this exact scenario here. Going into the last boss, at some point I held my sigil for an entire minute, which is not good. Next is Sigil of Flame, again, another generator. We just want to use this. It's not literally on cooldown, but you do want to cast this a lot. It's a higher priority than Chaos Strike or Annihilation, and you just want to continue to get souls generating. So you could do the same thing, look at your Sigil of Flames, and make sure that you don't have any massive gaps. You'll have a couple here and there, especially with running and everything, but this is a very high priority button that is typically underpressed by Havocs. So very important to look at this and make sure that you're using Sigil of Flame, not literally on cooldown, but nearly on cooldown. Again, high priority. Don't worry about the fact you're overcapping Fury with it. That doesn't matter. You want to generate those souls. Next on that front is Chaos Nova. Now, Chaos Nova does generate souls. That is from a talent, which you can see on the summary page here, where 30% chance per enemy hit to generate a lesser soul fragment. Again, Reaver's Glaive is 6 souls, but it always gives you 1 back for using your combo, so it costs 5 souls per Reaver's Glaive. So if you're casting Chaos Nova on about 15 mobs, on average, that's going to give you an entire Reaver's Glaive. That's incredibly powerful. That's the same value as pressing the Hunt. So there's a lot of scenarios where Chaos Nova should be used for damage, and soul generation doesn't do good damage itself, but the soul generation from it is significant. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, and this one varies a lot dungeon to dungeon. A dungeon like Motherlode or Cinderbrew, there's a lot more opportunities for really good Chaos Novas to hit a lot of targets and to generate tons of souls. A dungeon like Rookery, you end up with quite a few smaller pulls. Maybe you're doing like 5 or 6 mobs at a time, and a couple of them may even be stun immune. So depending on the scenario, you're not pressing it on cooldown, but anytime you have a large target count of mobs and you've used all your higher priority buttons, it's good to throw that in and generate your souls. Next, we'll be looking at Vengeful Retreat. Now, this is a button that I have a few caveats to. All you get for pressing Vengeful Retreat in our Mythic Plus build is 10% critical strike chance. So if you're ever going to be mispositioning yourself, like entirely missing a global because you left the boss, typically it's not going to be worth using Vengeful Retreat. If you're ever worried about dying from pressing it, it's not going to be worth using. What I try to use Vengeful Retreat for most commonly is, and you can actually come out here to check your damage and initiative windows, I typically try to use it to overlap Immolation Auras that are happening at the same time as Fury of the Eldrachi hits. So this is only showing windows where I had initiative up. That's what clicking these Source Aura filters does. Whereas I can do the opposite. I can click it again and it will only show damage outside of initiative. I will say this is a very laggy feature and it can crash your Warcraft logs. If that does happen, you may have to literally close it and open up a new one. Alright. Another extremely important thing in Mythic Plus is, outside of pure single target, you never want to do a Blade Dance into Chaos Strike combo from your Reaver's Glaive. You always want the Blade Dance to be after a Chaos Strike. Now the way you can check that is, you can actually check to see if while you have the Glaive Flurry buff up, and this is the buff that does the Fury of the Eldrachi hits, you can check and see if you do a Chaos Strike by clicking that, or vice versa, you can click Rending Strike, the one that applies your Chaos Strike debuff, and you can see if you ever press Blade Dance with that buff up. Now, if you go through and look, you'll see I have Trail of Ruin damage, I have some Death Sweep hits, but no casts. And if I do this the other way, where I come and look at not Blade Dance, and again, this can be a bit laggy, so it's not the best feature to use, but it can be useful. But if I want to look at when I have Glaive Flurry, you'll notice that I have a significant amount of Chaos Strikes and Annihilations with that buff up, because I always want that to be used first before I press a Blade Dance that will spend this. Now, I do want to look at comparing logs. I did mention you can use your own logs. I pulled up random Havoc logs here. Sorry if you're unhappy that I used your logs. I just scrolled through the list for rookeries and found one with a similar timing to mine. It was a few seconds off. And also, this is good to know that if you're looking at a log in another language, there's a translate button in the top right, and it will show everything in whatever language you are using locally. So I can look at the logs here, and I can actually take the code from this, and this will allow me to compare. So I can compare reports through this URL, and now we're going to have two different logs. Blue is the first log, so I'll click myself, and pink is the second log, and then again I will hit translate, which will show it in English, and now I can compare the two logs. So, instantly pulling these up, and to compare myself to just an average DH in a bit more realistic key level. This was a 16, and they parsed over a 50, so they were pretty much just above perfect average. We can now look at the damage differences, and keep in mind this was a very, very similar key. 5-second difference, so I don't really need to do any snipping. Actually, we had some deaths, or they had deaths that made theirs shorter, so let me shorten mine just to cut off the last bit of the final boss, just so the cast counts and everything line up well. So, looking through, we can see pretty clearly that there's a big damage difference. I'm doing 1.3 million more DPS, almost 2 billion more over the key. It is a higher key level, so some of that will come from that, but we can also look at different things and see massive differences. Immolation Aura is not on top for them, while it is on top for me, pretty significantly over my I-Beam, about a little bit over 15% ahead. Whereas I-Beam is their top damage. They do have 3 more casts of I-Beam than me, but the damage isn't higher because I typically always buff mine and I hit more targets. So you can see, despite the fact they have 3 more casts, you can check the hit count. I've hit 2,652, which means I'm getting more AoE from it on average, whereas they're 2,400. Rogue Glaive is still second for them, and these are really all just done passively through either throwing Reaver's Glaive itself for the Soul Scar damage, or the throw glaives from Blade Dance. So we don't worry about that too much. Next is Immolation Aura. Theirs is significantly lower, again with more casts, but significantly less hits. And if I look, I expect the Rage Fire damage to be a lot worse, which it is. So you can see some differences there, likely in how they're using their thrill buffs, and I can actually click that and check our damage when we're in Thrill the Fight. And we can see my DPS in Thrill the Fight is 3.5 million, theirs is 1.7. Now let me go back to just before I was looking at that. Take the source buffs off and reload the page. So part of that's because I'm doing significantly more damage, but part of it is because I have much higher thrill uptime. If I come in here, I will see the Thrill the Fight buff, and right away, what you can see from this is a large difference in uptime. Theirs is only 43% with massive gaps in the Reaver Glaive usage, and if you look at mine, it's 57% uptime. Much more consistent, up way more often. So I'm getting a lot more damage out in those 15% damage amps, and I just have way more buff windows. They only have 69 to my 91, which is a massive gap in Reaper's Glaive usage. There's a couple things from there that we can check on that. One is going to be Art of the Glaive stacks. This is how many souls I picked up in the dungeon. For me, it was 510. For them, 395. That difference of 105 souls is incredibly high. That's 21 Reaper's Glaives, give or take. And then you're also going to be missing even more than that, because the more Reaper's Glaives you get out and the higher uptime that you have on Reaver's Mark, which we can check through debuffs here, you can see 75% uptime for me and 56 for them. That's what causes Wounded Quarry to trigger. So not only is it funneling damage during that time, but Wounded Quarry triggering has a chance to spawn a soul. So that's going to spawn souls as well that are not shown here. I also have one extra hunt cast compared to them, so that gives me a whole extra Reaver's Glaive there as well. As for why I have more souls than them, that's something that we're going to want to go into cast to look at. So, let's see what we see different here. First thing is Chaos Strike and Annihilation casts. For Annihilations, I have 10 more casts. Not that significant, but going to be a few more souls. For Chaos Strike, I have 47 more casts. That's going to be a good handful of souls. Between the two, likely somewhere in the range of about 20 souls, or 4 Reaver's Glaives. Again, that ends up being significant. We can also see they're Fellblading a lot, and if I go check Fury Waste, I'm sure they're going to be wasting a ton more Fury than me, because Fellblade is just not the best global to be hitting. So you can see they have a lot of Fury Waste through that. So there's a lot of wasted globals going into Fellblade. A lot of players tend to use it to cancel Vengeful Retreat, which, looking at this, we can also see was not really being used here. Canceling Vengeful Retreat with Fellblade is not always the best. It's better than being out of range, but it's best to position yourself in a way that you're not going to need to use it. Next, let's look at Sigil of Spite. Again, I was missing a few casts in this dungeon, so I actually have less, which is not good. It's definitely something I need to work on, making sure I'm pressing that more on cooldown. Sigil of Flame, I have 9 more usages, so getting 9 extra souls there. And I'm using Sigil of Misery to spawn souls, especially like right at the end of combat ending, so 5 extra souls from that. And we have Chaos Nova usage. I'm going to go look at Chaos Nova now. Best way to actually see this, though, is not through the cast count, but it's going to be through the enemy's hit. So I have 77 hits to them having 67, despite the fact they have an extra cast. That's on average 3 more souls. Pretty minor, but this player's actually using Chaos Nova pretty effectively. Sometimes I'll look into logs and see, especially doing coaching, they might have 0 or 1 cast. That's going to be a lot of souls that are lost. So one thing I want to check here is whether or not they are letting their stacks fall. And you can see that every time they get a Reaver's Glaive, they just throw it. They never sit on a Reaver's Glaive. It gets up to 6, they get a Reaver's Glaive instantly, and it's thrown. Which is very different compared to mine. Mine, that's never the case. Anytime you see these flat tops, that's me sitting on the souls for an extended period of time, and anytime it's going above 6, like when I have it going up to 12 here, or 15, 16 near the end, that is timing where I'm sitting on a ton of souls as well as a Reaver Glaive itself. The reason for this is, if there's better times to burst that, especially like the last boss, for example, I might use 4 different Reaver's Glaives, 4 or 5, in a single burn phase, and do a significant amount of damage in those burn phases. Which is actually something that I can come here and look at. Checking to see if I can do this backwards. I cannot. But what I can look at here is Scarred Monstrosity. going to change this to bosses and trash and try to look at it this way. Just to show a difference in what the burst windows look like. Because you can see very clearly where I am doing my burst window. And in this window, which is about 20 seconds, you can see that I'm pulling 15.6 million DPS on my first burn window, and I have 3 Reaver Slaves going out. Whereas if I go look at their burst windows, which you can see here in their log, let me go double check that I'm looking at the right window here, which I can do through debuffs on enemies. And I'm going to look at their Scarden Monstrosity, or Voidstone Monstrosity, which is going to be the pink one. And, sorry, I actually want to look at buffs, find the Storm's Vengeance. And I want to look in this window. So I'm going to look at the damage done by friendlies in that window for them. And you can see their Havoc is only doing about 7 million DPS in their burn window. About half of what I'm doing. Part of this could be a cooldown gap, but better usage of cooldowns is going to make a significant difference, so that's something you could be looking at as well. Just getting myself back to neutral state with what was clicked. So next I want to look at correct targeting for Reaver's Mark. I showed the uptime on this before, but this is something that's incredibly important. And what I mean by correct targeting is do not target a mob that's going to die and put a mark on it if that is your last Reaver's Glaive. So I'll actually come back to debuffs applied by friendly. And this one's a lot easier to look at if you're not in a comparison log. So you can see here, they put their first mark out very late into the first pull, and then 6 seconds later it falls off because the mob dies. And not only that, you can see that they're consistently applying a 2-stack of Reaver's Mark, which is a large issue. And you can see a lot of times where the mark goes out and then the mob dies very shortly after. Definitely a lot less than the 20-second timer that you have on this. That's why their uptime is so bad, mixed with less soul generation, and just this all works into being a lot less souls and a lot less Reaver Slaves, which is going to be a way less damage over a dungeon. Number one thing that I think you can ever work on and look at is your Reaver's Mark uptime. And again, the difference there is mine is at 75%. And if I click into it and look at it for just myself, I don't want to back out of the compare, but that's how I show what I wanted to show. But yes, the uptime is significantly higher, and that's way more important. Again, this is where we see a gap in damage such as Wounded Quarry, because for most of the dungeon, they're only getting it out like 2/3 of the time at most while in combat, probably a little bit less. Mine is almost always up. And you can see large windows where you're doing a significant amount of funnel through into Quarry, and the difference of me having the buff up versus them not even having one out is incredibly large. Always having this buff up is going to be a significant amount of souls, damage, and everything. So looking at your own logs, I would really focus on that Wounded Quarry and Reaver's Mark uptime, because that's incredibly important. And as I mentioned, they were really bad looking at this for using Death Sweep first after Reaver's Glaive or Blade Dance, and then Chaos Striking after. That's bad for multiple reasons. The first one is, in 2-target plus, it's better always to have 6 hits of Fury of the Eldrachi. It's going to result in more damage. The second is, if you don't have your mark on the target yet, then the physical damage dealt by that Blade Dance, that's both the AoE version of Blade Dance or Death Sweep itself, all of the Throw Glaives, all of the Fury of the Eldrachi hits, and the preemptive strikes that happen from the Throw Glaives, those do not get funneled through Wounded Quarry, because you don't have an active mark out. So if I come up here and look and see how often did they press Blade Dance while Rending Strike was up? I can click there, and I can check it here. They had 19 Death Sweeps and 12 Blade Dances used while still having not put out their mark. That is incredibly high and really not good. Just trying to think of other things that I could show for this video. I did mention Fury Escapes before, so I'll take a look at that for them. And you can see that they actually do have less Furious Gazes than me, even though they have more casts of Eye Beam, if I remember correctly. Okay, they don't have more unless I clip the log. That's okay. That's really most of the things that I can think about. It's because I went through and showed how to actually look into the logs. But the really big things are going to be your soul generators and making sure that those are being used basically on cooldown, except for Chaos Nova, which is situational, but Chaos Nova should be getting used as a soul generator. Making sure your hunt is used on cooldown. Incredibly important, and you always want to make sure that you've thrown your Reaver's Glaive first. It only gives you the Reaver's Glaive if you hunt without one on you. And that means if you have a stockpile of souls, you don't want to pick up a souls that will grant you one, so stop moving and cast the hunt while you're not moving. It's the best way to deal with that. Check your Vengeful Retreats, make sure that your initiative windows are actually landing on and hitting your Fury of the Eldrachi. Again, you can click initiative here and see what that looks like. And you can see a lot of my Fury of the Eldrachi damage and Immolation Auras in those windows. And that's ideal. That's really what I aim for. A lot of the time that overlaps with me eye beaming, but that's fine because as long as I'm getting it on the Immolation Auras and the Fury of the Eldrachis, which is then getting funneled in through into Quarry, that's what I care about. And I showed how to look at the timeline. Again, with the timeline, this is really just, you need to know how your opener does work, and you could just do it off of that. Go in, double check if you're doing your openers correctly when you're doing metas, and just look for mistakes in here compared to either other players, or go compare it to like the Wowhead rotation guides, which I keep updated. And that is about everything. Now, this ended up being a lot more freeform than I had anticipated, but it's really difficult to just show how to quickly and concisely go through logs. There's a lot to dig into for current Havoc, and it really does differ key by key and player by player where the issues land. So it wasn't really as simple as just coming and showing, hey, do XYZ and you're going to do infinite damage. That's unfortunately not how it works. But comparing yourself to top logs, going through, finding a log, and pulling up one of mine or another high-end M+ Havoc's logs and comparing yourself to it is a good place to start, because in a similar length key, you can look at cast counts, damage numbers, and see if your stuff is lining up in the right places. If yours is looking like this, where your Fury of the Eldrachi and Wounded Quarry are low, you are not utilizing Reaver's Glaives well, and that is, I think, the number one reason that most people do not do good damage on Havoc and keys right now. If you're playing Eldrachi, min-maxing Eldrachi Reaver is actually incredibly difficult. There's a lot of nuance to it, and that's one reason why I largely recommend people to play Felsguard if they aren't planning on learning all that nuance and min-maxing it to its full extent. Thank you for watching this video, and if you have any comments on it, whether you liked it or didn't like it, please leave those below. If you like this kind of content, I'd appreciate likes on the video, or a subscription to my channel, or both. That's everything for today. Thank you for watching, and have a good one. Bye for now.